So in the next half hour, these brilliant minds from across the spectrum of music community and geography and experiences are going to solve this question. They've got 30 minutes to do it. We're going to make and implement a much more just and equitable music community. I am, of course, joking. We are not going to solve anything in 30 minutes, but you all are going to have Katie Tuten as well. Katie is with us as well. We're going to have what I hope is a really exciting conversation that really kicks off what we're going to be doing over the next couple of days. Some of, I think, the smartest and kindest and most generous people in our community. Let's just get the ball rolling. You guys just chop it up for a little bit of time. Jami, Duffy, I see your smiling face. I'm going to start with you. So thinking about the conference, thinking about your work, thinking about this group, where would you even start? Why don't you introduce yourself for those who don't know you, and let's just get it going.
Yeah, I'm Jami Duffy. I've had the privilege of being the executive director of Youth on Record in Denver, Colorado for over 10 years. So I'm just going to dive in because we don't have a ton of time, and I'm really curious to hear what the other panelists have to say. As we're looking at a more equitable and just music industry, we're first looking at this moment of what feels like devastation, but we're actually seeing it as an opportunity because the music industry as it was certainly wasn't serving BIPOC communities, traditionally marginalized communities. It wasn't working for them. I saw a meme yesterday that said, from an artist a musician who said, I just did my budget and calculated how much money I've lost from not being able to tour over the past 8 months. And in fact, I've saved $200, right? And that just sort of speaks to the moment that we're in, that this kind of traditional industry isn't necessarily working, which is why we're having this question. So I just want to frame this in a way that we've been talking about at Youth on Record as we start to evolve into providing more services for artists in our community to create a life of meaning through their art. So we're kind of looking at this under the umbrella of 5 I's. The first one we're looking at is inner life. So we want to work with artists, and we're encouraging everybody to work with artists about the why. Why are you here? Why music? What is your personal mission and vision? So really digging into the inner life of the artist is sort of phase 1 for us that we think we should start doing as a whole industry. The next is impact. We're really looking at what kind of impact on our community can artists have if they have a better understanding of their personal mission and vision? Bobby Lefebvre, our statewide poet laureate, just asked us all, what we're grateful for in Colorado. And I said, I'm grateful to live in a community where artists care less about making it and more about making their communities whole. And so what does our industry look like if we start to envision the impact that we're each having as artists? So we've got inner life, we've got impact, then industry. We're finding that so many local artists actually don't understand the music industry. It's complex for a reason. And a lot of times, if you don't understand something, it's designed that way. It's designed that way so that you don't understand how to navigate it. And if you don't understand how to navigate it, you don't have any agency in it. And so we're going to try to kind of lift the curtain on the industry so that people have a better understanding of exactly how it works. We're encouraging incubation of ideas and diversification of the hustle, as our artists say. So this idea that you're just going to be an artist on stage and that's how you're going to make it, and that's how you're going to tour, and that's what you're going to do, that's all fine and well. But I will say that every single artist I know who is currently employed through this pandemic is serving their community. So Youth on Record has managed to hire 5 additional artists during this time, during this economic devastation. And that's in part because we have a vision and mission that's about the community. So every artist I know who is thriving right now has a personal mission, has a personal vision, and is serving their community. And then, finally, we want to talk about investment. So we are curious to have conversations with all of you about what does it look like if our music community is investing in each other's projects. And then in turn, all of us are investing in artists that we know. So what does a new economy look like? we're interested in creating both alternatives and working in the system that it stands. So, just again, we're looking at inner life, impact, industry, incubation, and investment as a potential model for the next new normal. So I'll stop there because there's so many people who want to talk, but that's sort of the lens that we're going to take throughout the next 2 days and moving into the future. Thanks.
Hakim, why don't you jump in on that, if you don't mind, and talk a little bit about the sort of dual roles that you play in terms of as your artist life and then your kind of policy life.
Sure. Thanks for that, Duffy. That was a great tee up, and I'm happy to be here and see so many influential individuals on this panel. My role in Albuquerque has shifted, right, over the years. I know Bobby. She mentioned Bobby. That's a homie of mine. I remember when Bobby was bidding to be the poet laureate there. And he was asking me stuff like I knew anything. But I was the first poet laureate of Albuquerque, 2012, 2014. In doing that, I've been allowed to create in this community. I say really, they've allowed me to try things and mess up, try things and not be good at them. And they've encouraged me as an artist to continue to kind of stretch my boundaries. And so I've been able to have a music career here. I've been able to have an acting career here as a result of my poetry. Fast forward to 2.5 years ago when the current mayor, Tim Keller, ran on a very progressive platform. He ran on a platform where he would have a 6-pillar economic strategy, and one of those pillars would actually be the creative economy. It's radical, and hired 2 artists to lead the Department of we call it Cultural Services. Some people call it Cultural Affairs, and so I'm the deputy director of that department. I went from being kind of a output of the creative economy to an input of our creative economy here. And so I like how Jami framed that. I like the interpersonal. I'm gonna take 1 in 5, right? There's the interpersonal and then there's the investment on the other end, right? And what I hope to see on the other side of this, if that's the question, Michael, in the post-pandemic world, is not just interpersonal in the sense that we get to know our artists as more than artists. I think that that's been a struggle for artists all along. Some artists like to have their individual life and world and identity present, and they actually market that. Other artists don't. They're just like, here's my art, leave my personal life alone. But I like to look at it as like, how do we treat them as citizens independent of their artistry? How do we create wraparound services? And that's the government, the bureaucrat in me coming out now. How do we create, opportunities for them to file for unemployment that we've seen? Like we saw that happen in the stimulus package. We know we can do it. We know we can include in gig economy folks in these social programs, in the social safety net. How do we make that permanent on the other side? To me, that is the interpersonal piece. That's the whole artist. The artist is a whole person making sure their other needs are met. So they're not dependent, to Duffy's point, on the kind of dog eat dog, survival of the fittest economy that the industry was before. That if you would just work hard and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you'll barely make it. And the idea that, we've saved money, like many artists who travel and tour, I did that for a long time. Without having to travel and tour, there's money on the table. Sure, you're not getting paid whatever, you were going to get paid by the performance venue that you were going to, but you also didn't spend the amount of money that you normally spend on the road. And so how do we look at that differently and shift those economics to say, well, there's a way to invest in these artists beyond just their performance fee, because we're saving money on having to move them around, having to lodge them, having to feed them. What does that look like on the other side of this, especially if virtual concerts remain and stay a thing? And then just the last piece I'll say, as far as investment, that's really, what we're struggling with as a municipality. Like Albuquerque is an art-friendly city. It was before this mayor came in. New Mexico is a very art-friendly state. In fact, a lot of our state identity is wrapped up in the arts and creatives, and exporting our art across borders, exporting, if you've ever been to Santa Fe, the Santa Fe aesthetic across the world. Yet, the folks who do it on a day-to-day basis, the folks that if you came here and you went to Old Town, and they would be the vendors actually in the Old Town Portal, hand-to-hand transactions with clay pots, aren't reaping the same benefits that New Mexico True and all of the kind of campaigns that we're doing to really increase our brand. It's not trickling down to the independent artists, and we have to figure out a way to do that.
Thank you, Hakim. Why don't we bring Dessa in just for some opening thoughts? And then I'm excited to hear from Katie and Portia, both in terms of sort of the organizing efforts that they've been involved with this year, kind of, bridging, across the sector to kind of think about structural change. But Dessa, do you have anything to kind of chime in? Is anything connected?
Yeah. Good morning. I'm Dessa, and I primarily make my living as a performing artist. I started essentially in a very DIY kind of punk rock informed independent hip hop crew. So very much the pile in the van kind of lifestyle, rolling from city to city. As the years have also rolled by, I now also work as like a writer and a podcast host. And, and thinking about how to equalize the playing field and welcome more people in, some of the things that come to mind immediately for me are compensation models, particularly digital compensation models. So trying to find a way to compensate people more fairly for digital streams. Not only is it untenable as is, it's just too small a fraction of a cent. And there's money to be made in that universe, right? Like people are willing to pay for the service. People are willing to watch the ads. Money's coming in, but money is not going out in an equitable way to the creators of content. And also that penalizes people unequally. So if you're in a genre like hip hop, it is more likely that your fan base streams. If you're in a genre like country music, it's more likely that your audience purchases a physical album, even sometimes through exclusive deals to like a Walmart, right? So not only does that change how you're getting paid, but until very recently, that would change how your music was evaluated in the marketplace by places like Billboard, right? Because people, for a long time, a lot of those kind of standard benchmarks of success on the big screen had been counting album sales, but not counting album streams in the same way. They've been a little slower to catch up in that environment, which doesn't affect everybody equally. Also, maybe mileage varies, but my experience, having worked in the industry for a long time, is very much that every generation, every 2 or 3 years, as a new wave of creators graduates high school or drops out of college or whatever their path is to kind of, take their turn at bat, that they're finding the same dots that they have to connect that the last generation did, and then wipe the slate blank again. And I don't mean that there's a territorialism in networks. I haven't found that. I found a lot of really generous people, but rather that we don't have the same kind of infrastructures that when you tell your guidance counselor, when you're like, 18, if you're lucky enough to have a great guidance counselor, like, I really would like to try to make it in the performing arts. Give it a shot, If you were to say, hey, I really want to try mechanical engineering, they go, cool, let me talk to you about the mentorship program down the street. Let me give you these 5 pamphlets. Let me plug you in. And my sense is that even though we do have, some occasional great open mics, there's a generosity of spirit. We could use a lot more connection of those dots from places like Jami, from people like Hakim too, trying to figure out, okay, not only here's a roadmap, or at least some mile markers for the organizations in your community that can help get you on stage, but also for all of the kind of all of the infrastructure that every artist needs to build. They use it almost never full time. So for example, if you've got 8 bands, what a great opportunity to share, if not a tour van, then at least like a press list, because otherwise you've got 8 people doing the same Google searches with all their time. There's so much opportunity to share resources. And I think that artists do not conceptualize themselves as their primary competitors. Like my primary competition pre and during the pandemic isn't another literary, female rapper. It's like laundry. I'm fighting Netflix. I'm share of your attention. And usually, a song is $1.50 tops. A show is between $10 and $25. Like usually it's a manageable spend for most of our audiences. And so to stop conceptualizing ourselves as fighting for finite market share and start linking arms to try to figure out how to bring every interested party along, that would be something I'd be really interested in.
That's so great, Dessa. And Katie, let me turn to you and ask you. I'm going to give you an impossible question, so you'll pull it off because you're brilliant. But I mean, I'd like to try to make the bridge between sort of your community at the Hideout which many of us, in this conference have know very well, but may be unknown to some others. But, what is the sort of the mission of the Hideout? What do you see your role is, as a kind of venue, and how does that then link into, over the last couple of years, the importance of connecting in with the Chicago Independent Venue League and NEVA, and sort of, trying to think about that infrastructure building on a national level?
Yeah. Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's kind of bizarre. You think, we own this club in Chicago. It's small in size, but kind of big in reach. And we just followed our heart and the mission that the Hideout had, which is we are a part of the community. So we look at the Hideout primarily as a community house where people bring us ideas, and we are a space in which they can launch those ideas. So from that, then it went to the Chicago Independent Venue League again, because how can we collectively come together? All these different venues who are typically competitors, but we have shared interest, and then on and upward to NEVA. So myself and a couple other members of Civils were the founding members of NEVA, because we understood how important it is to protect these spaces where artists can try things out, can succeed or fail. And then also, because we are a trusted voice within our communities, our voices are heard by elected officials as well as just the community. Now, this is kind of a small little story, but it happened yesterday. 2 days ago, a friend of mine called me, and she continues to provide suppers for people who are experiencing homelessness. And the weather is turning quite cold here. And within a day, the Hideout just put one little Instagram out, and we got 20 coats, and we're going to collect probably far more coats next week. But it took many years to build that community. But I think it came from a place of honesty. Both my husband and I work for, he's a Chicago public school teacher. I work for a not-for-profit. And I think, and also, kudos to Michael Bracey, because he helped guide us, because we didn't understand these waters very well, like in terms of, I was a community organizer in some respects, but not at a larger scale. So Bracey walked side by side with us as we pulled together the Chicago Independent Venue League. And that was actually to go against, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but a large consortium. There was somebody that wanted to buy our market, and we were like, oh, hell no, not on our watch. But then also what they were trying to do was set up something called the TIF, tax increment financing. And it was, they basically stole like $2.3 billion out of the city coffers. And what was so interesting to me was we rallied hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people to go to City Hall, most of which had never walked into City Hall. I was shocked. Many, a lot of these young bands who tour the world, they're pretty, in our world, like famous bands. They had never walked into City Hall, and they were appalled at how City Council just ran things through. And from that, I think that they will be activists their entire lives. They're always the kind of folks that are online and they're pushing this or that, but they had a one-on-one visit, or they saw how City Council works, or more importantly, how it doesn't work. So now they are very comfortable calling their alderman. Now they're very comfortable in going and meeting with them, whatever the issue may be, as defined by themselves and their community. Is that what you want to? Yeah. Okay.
No, that's great. And we'll talk a little bit more. We thankfully have another 20 minutes for this session, so we've got plenty of time to kind of go through some of these things. But drawing some connections between that local activism, what's happening at the federal level, and sort of how we're rethinking some of the structural stuff. And Portia, we're so happy to see you, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. And for those who don't know Portia Sabin, she's just been a rock star in the community for a really long time, maybe both in terms of a scene builder and label head and curator, and one of the most kind of curious and smart people just exploring kind of the evolutions of this community for a long time. And now heading up the Music Business Association, kind of wearing a different hat and a little bit of a different role. And So Portia, just love kind of your take, hearing these thoughts, the things that you've been thinking about, what you're hearing from your membership and your community. And also, I know that you've been curating a lot of programming inside your organization, asking some of these similar questions around what are some of the things that we need to clean up and do better and rethink, as we move forward in music.
Sorry guys, that was really super bad timing. It's my 83-year-old dad's cell phone.
Perfect.
It's so loud. Okay, anyway, I'm Portia. I run the Music Business Association. Music Business Association is a trade association for a lot of different sectors of the music industry. It's kind of a unique association because we have the major labels, indie labels, we have publishers, we have managers, we have all the retail stores and distributors. What we don't have a ton of is artists. And, I feel like I want to pick up on what Jami and Dessa both, or what everybody's been talking about here, because, I feel like one of my missions for the last, 15 years or so has been really trying to educate artists. Certainly when I was doing A&R at my independent record label, I really tried to do that all the time, because in my opinion, an educated artist is, a label's best friend. It's everybody's best friend. You need to understand this business. I think Hakim said that, we need artists to understand what they're getting into, because you can't make good decisions about your career if you don't understand the things that you sign and where your money is coming from, et cetera, et cetera. So the education piece is really important, but the other piece that I think is really important, I think it's interesting how this conversation has evolved today. I've been thinking for the last, ever since I got this job, which is about a year ago, that what we really are lacking in this country is a really strong artists organization. We don't have that for whatever reason. The Recording Academy exists, but to be 100% honest, the Recording Academy is largely made up of producers and engineers, which is not a bad thing. It's a great association for those people. There are artists involved, but it's just not, it doesn't serve that purpose. And I know that there's some other artists organizations in this country, but, because at the end of the day, I think what we're missing as in the collective voice of the marketplace is the might of the artists, because that is really, I think artists don't understand how much power they have, whether they're just starting out or when they're really big. They still have a ton of power because they have the fans and they have the ears of their fans, and they can say, look how much damage Taylor Swift can do in a good way, right? Look how much good trouble Taylor Swift gets into by just tweeting to her fan base, or she's done incredible things. Here in Nashville, she gave away a bunch of signed copies of her new album to local independent retailers so that they could keep their doors open, so they could make money. She's a force just by herself. So imagine if we had 100 or 200 artists like that all working together to say stuff like, hey, guess what? The per stream rate needs to be higher because we're not going to do this anymore for, 0.0034 cents or whatever. It's that would be power. And I feel like that really needs to happen. So, sort of on the side, I'm kind of interested in that. If anyone wants to email me about stuff they hear, it's people who are interested in doing that. That is something I'm definitely interested in. From my perspective, which is at this point, sort of the business community in the music industry, we've been doing a lot so far this year with regard to social justice, racial justice. I think that is a place where we can make change fairly quickly and fairly efficiently, because that's just simply injustice that's been allowed to persist for too long. And there's no reason that people can't change. And people are changing. The companies have sort of all stepped up to pledge that they're going to do better. And, they've hired, they've created positions, they've added money, they've made big efforts. So, and I feel like my job is to continue to hold everybody's feet to the fire to really put their money where their mouth is and make things change within the next year. So, I do think that that's not a heavy lift for this industry. I think we can do that. But in terms of the education and the artist rights, some kind of, strong artist rights group, I would like to see that in the next 12 months.
That's so great. I so appreciate all of y'all's perspectives, and I'm excited that hopefully over the next couple of days we're going to be talking about some of these themes in a pretty granular level in terms of, again, some of the nonprofit institutions that are developing, that potentially need support, and infrastructure, some of the local policies. I'm personally like super heartened and excited to see, again, the emergence of NEVA, the emergence of Be an Arts Hero, NIDO. We've got these organizations that are coming together in a moment of crisis, obviously, to try to engage, with the particular devastation of 2020. But the goal is hopefully that this becomes a starting point, not an end point, and that we're building power as we sort of understand, again, what policy means at the federal level or even at the global level, what, again, engaging in philanthropy, what these new business models look like. I mean, all these pieces, kind of need to be engaged with simultaneously. And so it's going to be, fascinating to kind of see where people gravitate and organizationally what happens. I want to stop talking because y'all are going to hear a lot of me for 2 days, and these are super smart people. So everybody put a lot of really interesting ideas on the table. I just love for the presenters just to chop it up for 15 minutes. Just what you guys hear that you want to pick up on. I know there's some really great ideas in the chat right now. So somebody, don't be shy. Y'all jump in.
Can I ask Portia, what do you think the first step would be to organizing the artists? Because I totally agree with you. I mean, I saw it before my very eyes how they were just empowered by trying to make an effort in City Hall. And then also I'm on the lobbying committee of NEVA. And it was so interesting, brilliant people, but they were like, they didn't understand the process. And there's no going back now. Now they clearly understand how to do this. And if we would get stuck with the elected official, we would call artists who would actually call them. And it was interesting. That would be what would get them to co-sponsor. And what do you think the first steps would be to organize artists? Because I totally agree with you. I think that they have the power that they are not utilizing collectively.
Well, I think Dessa and Hakim can answer this because they're artists, but I think Dessa alluded to it earlier. I think one thing that is pervasive is this notion that the pie is finite and that if I get a tiny slice, I have to hang on to that slice and I can't possibly share because then it'll be taken away from me. So I think we need to, if there's an organization in existence, I think there's several, everybody needs to get with that organization and say, we're supporting you and the pie is big enough and we're going to grow the pie for everybody. We're not going to you're not going to get in trouble for speaking out. I think we have to support the artists in their efforts to come together, I would say, as a community, as an industry.
Yeah. If I could just add, I think one thing that's really important to start talking about is trust and mistrust, especially when we're talking about traditionally marginalized artists. So I can't advocate enough for working with folks like Youth on Record and other sort of pillar local music organizations because they already have established track records and trust and have proven time and time again that we are here for artists and that we are really just on a mission to empower communities. Because I think if we take an approach where we say, well, this is the new artist agency, but it's not falling under something that already has a proven track record of establishing deep and solid relationships in the community, there's going to be some mistrust there, especially from artists who haven't been brought into the fold. So I know Youth on Record is working on something outside of our traditional model for this. And what we're starting with is artists who have been doing this work for 10, 20, 30 years. Hakim, Dessa will know, there are folks who do this all the time. Denver is really known for arts activism, right? And showing up at City Hall. And so I think starting there and then allowing other artists to see this actually works. There's an established trust here, because if it sort of just comes out of left field, why would artists would have no reason to sort of trust that, especially in this political climate. So I think it's important locally to find who is that anchor agency, organization, group already, and then build from there rather than trying to recreate the wheel.
To me, to pipe in quickly, to me, it almost feels like a tiered solution, because I think a lot of these places, to Jami's point, exist on the ground, whether that's Youth and Record in Colorado. Springboard for the Arts was a good one in my hometown where I grew up in Minneapolis. But it's very tricky if you're touring. So the whole thing is reinventing the wheel at every tour stop, right? Particularly. So if we could find a way to say, okay, here's a centralized place where the resources for trusted organizations are collected in a sort of user-friendly manner. So you can click through and say, okay, I'm going to New York, I'm going to Boston, I'm going to, I'm going to Denver and Fort Collins. And then you can click through and say, great. Okay, here is the existing resource of trusted organizations. And maybe there is a side panel to say like, hey, you want to trade shows? I don't have the pay for play money to get on some of these silly showcases. But if you've got 200 fans in Chicago and I've got 200 fans in Boston and you've got 200 fans, okay, cool. We could do a routing where we're all sharing one another's resources and bringing new fans to the table for every independent band.
Hey, Dessa, could you help me understand a little bit more from the artist perspective? So if you're touring and you're going to other cities and you're wanting to click on that one-stop shop, I'm doing a little market research here.
Yeah.
What are the resources you dial in? Like, what are you looking for?
Great question. Okay, so
what are other artists looking for? Yeah.
In a perfect environment, I can imagine a world where if I'm renting gear, my money could go to another band instead of a corporate gear rental shop. I could say, hey, I need a hi-hat stand and I need, a bass amp. Or I could say, hey, I'd love to hire a string section. So I did a string quartet tour, right before the pandemic shut down. It'd be great to find a place where you can see other artists who are kind of connected into the same community. I can imagine an environment where I'm looking for an opening band and I'm willing to trade them. So right now, and forgive me, Katie, if I'm misrepresenting, but right now, usually I think venues will say, okay, Hakim, you're coming to town. Cool. Let me find a local person to pair you with. And that is a great solution. But an even better solution might be if I can do those long weekend tours, if we could all be headliners in our home states, right? But be openers for one another when we're on the road. That's a growth model now instead of just skimming the bare minimum of ticket sales. But the problem is, how much time can you spend online Googling who's hot in Chicago? You know what I mean? It'd be great if you could find a centralized resource and say, hey, I'm going to Chicago. Who can do $200? Who's willing to play for $400? I'll open for you. You open for me.
I was thinking something. So I like the idea about trust and what you were saying. So when we started the Chicago Independent Venue League, we're all highly competitive. And I think some of these things just happen organically. So we collectively came together around one or two issues, and then it has grown into something far more substantial. And to Dessa's point, then it grew to NEVA, right? So one of the challenges we have is sometimes these multinational corporations, they're able to book tours across the country. So it bumps us all out of the box, right? So now just organically, now I know people from all over the country, and you can be darn sure that we've been talking like, all right, well, let's start a tour here. And then we go to Iowa, then we go to Minneapolis, and we, so it just, Dessa, to your point, I think it just happens organically, and trust can be built. And I think if people collectively come together around a couple of issues, it'll continue to grow. And I think for us, one of the things that was so powerful was we didn't go to an established organization. We were the organization. We established it, and people's voices were heard. And then we collectively came together and we continue to evolve. The other thing that's kind of exciting for me is we had never interfaced, or not really, with not-for-profits. I mean, that's like a whole nother world to us. And now we're kind of coming together and seeing where we have things that align, that are similar. But I agree with Portia. I think that there needs to be some sort of artist collective, but I am not an artist. I am a space that, is provided for artists. But I think it needs to happen, but I'm not quite sure how. And I think it's not just about their power to government or to marketing or any of those kind of things. I think that the groups themselves will define what is important to them. So one of the things I said to my group is I'm like, we need to stop these unpaid internships. You know, only people of great wealth can like work for free for 4 or 5 months. You know, I mean, those kind of ideas of which my colleagues have never thought about. So I would be I'm happy to push that idea forward. But again, I think it's going to grow organically.
And if I could just I'm gonna jump back all the way to Portia's question, and I would love to get, especially you, Dessa, your input on this one as well. I think that there is certainly there's a benefit to the decentralization of artists. Like the industry has thrived off of us being like on our own, not sharing tools of the trade, not sharing magic and spells in your little magic book, and really having to do it like was said earlier, to really restart every single time, like every time, even as an independent artist. When you go to a city once, then you're starting to, from the very beginning, I've been there once, my network grows each time I go, and then how can we make that a thing that's shareable, a thing that's sustainable, that we don't have to recreate every time, to the point. And I love hearing from you, Katie, because I think venues have to be part of the discussion. Oftentimes it's like the independent artist versus the big corporate label and industries. I mean, the venues are in this conversation as well. And your attitude is one that's pro-artists. All venues' attitudes are not pro-artists. And again, they benefit from us not unionizing or organizing or coming together. They benefit even when we try to set our rates. They're always trying to get the lowest rate, so they don't want us to talk about what it does get, what I'm not trying to get. And so how do we deconstruct that? Like that to me would be a goal of this performing artists, union of sorts. And then also I think that it's very real that a lot of the kind of we were mentioning Taylor Swift earlier. Like they do see the artist, the face oftentimes of the song or the label of the band as expendable. And as an artist going into that, right, you feel isolated. You feel like I can't say no to things. You feel like, they know more than me because they've been doing it so long. So I should just like go along and get along and not rock the boat. And that's where you see some of the saddest stories of labels, producers, bands, and venues and promoters taking advantage of particularly female artists, but artists in general, because they know that, there's this isolationism that they can benefit from, and they kind of perpetuate that. And it goes into lots of things. It's not just booking. It goes into billing. It goes into where you are in the lineup when they book a show. Like there's so many implications around how folks benefit from artists not being in conversation with one another.
Case in point, our venues, our independent venues, exact same thing. Pick us off like, government or, once we came together, there was power there. And, we would never talk ever about bands because that would be antitrust. And the funniest story was, finally after the meeting was done, I was like, all right, who got the Jeff Parker show? Because like 6 of us bid on that show. But once we collectively came together, and as Jami said, we built trust. That was huge. And then, some of our meetings are pretty boring, like who has a good HVAC guy, right? But we can move the needle when it comes to social justice, to impact, to, letting people's voices be heard. And I'm really excited about some of these things.
And I think that some of this might happen organically too, and that sure, there are going to be some artists, who want to stay territorial and keep their spell book under lock and key. Cool. But I think so many people would be game to varying degrees to engage. If it's like, at the very beginning of your career, do you remember like couchsurfing.com? It was just essentially like, I need a place to crash for free. Okay, so that's like step one, right? It's my first weekend show. But there are so many possibilities for shared resources that as you go, that I think it would be so obviously in everyone's self-interest, let alone a feeling of altruism, right? To say, hey, here's some opportunities to share. So for example, couchsurfing, when you first start, a lot of us are desperately hiring flyering teams. You never know if the shit goes actually up. Hey, I'll put yours up. You put mine up when I come. I've also done some like attempts at digital marketing trades. I'll give you my best flyer pre-done text if you're game to put it up if you like the new single. Also, merch on the road. We spend so much money shipping things fast to a venue that's closed when it gets there, to pick it up on FedEx just in time to drive it home to put it in our mother's basements because it never got to the merch booth. If we could say, hey, can I get 2 boxes shipped to your house and pay you $20 free passes and some drink tickets backstage to get my damn merch to the venue, please? Oh, in a heartbeat.
So I'm going to jump in here. This is obviously an amazing conversation, and we are just so incredibly appreciative of the 5 of you coming together. And we know that, frankly, we could just let this be the conference for 2 days and let you all talk, and I'd certainly be happy. But this was really what we wanted to do at the beginning of the event, is just kind of introduce a bunch of these ideas. And I think we heard a ton of really smart, really interesting takes. And part of, I think, what we're thinking about, in terms of Music Policy Forum and our people, I think you all touched on a lot of it. And sort of one of, Michael's cliches over the last 20 years, I always say is, the incremental can lead to the transformational. And we see a lot of sort of little things that we can control, we can build, and we can support, and we can grow networks, we can do research, and all the things we can do. And then we also think about, again, this year of 2020, just completely redefining what's possible in terms of policy, in terms of the conversations we can have at the federal level. Katie mentions antitrust. The structures of the live music industry in this country are, by and large, dictated by the fact that our federal government, our Justice Department, had no interest in looking at the SFX roll-up back in the late 90s, which led to Clear Channel Entertainment, which led to Live Nation, which led to a lot of where we are now. So, we have an opportunity both through our local organizing and our networks and sort of, engaging in this work, whether, again, it's locally based, whether it's policy, whether it's just trying to build, local support infrastructure, but also feed into those big, national and global conversations, which really could shake things up. So that's, again, a lot of, the point of the next 2 days is just starting that process for all of us to think about where do we want to fit in that? Where can we as individuals or as networks or as organizations have the biggest impact? We all know, that everybody who's part of this conference is not looking for hobbies, right? We're all overtaxed. We're all exhausted. We all can't just be taking on everything. We have to be very focused and coordinated and strategic. And where do we put our time and our energy and our talents and our resources? So, hopefully, again, what this conversation tees up is this notion that we have this opportunity. We have, another one of my cliches. God, we're going to have Michael's TED Talk for 2 days. One of my cliches is always have a plan, right? Always have a move, and don't feel like we're powerless. And then I think that, again, what you all have reinforced is that we have moves, we have plays. It's going to be an issue of how do we think about, what those plays look like moving forward. So I want to, on behalf of everybody watching, thank you guys for getting up early and for kicking this off in the best way possible. It's always so great to see all of you. We're going to, and by the way, the chat has been fantastic. So we're going to download that and make sure that our panelists get emailed that so you can kind of see the conversations happen parallel. Thanks for all the attendees who've been contributing to that. We're going to take about a 2.5-minute break and move into our next session, which is about rethinking and reconceiving community media. Thank you, everybody.